The Vortex supremacy had conquered 43 star systems before they learned humanity's name. Admiral Krexithel studied the holographic display floating above his command throne, watching the pale blue marble that hung like a jewel against the void, Earth. The third planet orbited its yellow star with the lazy confidence of a world that had never known true war, or so his intelligence reports claimed. The humans had barely colonized their own moon, possessed no faster-than-light travel, and their most powerful weapons were primitive fusion devices that could barely crack a mountain. Pitiful. He rasped through his translator, mandibles clicking with amusement. Around him, the bridge of the Sovereign's wrath hummed with activity as his fleet welled dreadnoughts. 37 cruisers and over 200 support vessels held position at the edge of the system. Each ship carried enough firepower to glass a continent. Together, they could reduce Earth to molten slag within hours. The humans wouldn't even see them coming. Admiral, his tactical officer, Vexmer, approached with the respectful gait of a seasoned warrior. Long-range scans confirmed minimal defensive installations, a handful of orbital platforms around their homeworld, some mining operations on nearby asteroids. Their lunar colony appears to be their most significant off-world presence. Krexithel for eyes narrowed as he examined the tactical data. The moon base was indeed substantially larger than their initial reconnaissance had suggested. Sprawling industrial complexes dotted the lunar surface, connected by pressurized transit tubes that snaked across the barren landscape like metallic veins. Curious, but hardly threatening. What's their population estimate? Approximately 12 million on the lunar installations, Admiral. 8 billion on the primary world. 12 million. Krexithel had personally overseen the extermination of colonies 10 times that size. The Vortex way was simple: destroy the military, enslave the survivors, strip the worlds of resources, move on. These humans would learn to kneel, or they would learn to die. Sir, Communications Officer Ziltek's voice carried a note of confusion. We're receiving no response to our standard conquest demands. We've been broadcasting on all frequencies for 6 standard hours. Perhaps they don't understand our language, Vexmer suggested. Krexithel dismissed the notion with a wave of his armored claw. Every species eventually understood the language of overwhelming force. Begin the demonstration. Target their lunar mining facility Sector 7. 1 precision strike. Let them see what happens to those who ignore the supremacy. The weapons officer's claws danced across his console. Particle lance charging, Admiral. Targeting locked. Through the viewports, Krexithel could see the distant moon, barely visible as a gray speck against Earth's reflected light. In moments, that speck would bloom with the brilliant flash of vaporized metal and flesh. The humans would understand then. They always did. Fire. The Sovereign's wrath shuddered as its primary weapon discharged. A beam of coherent energy, invisible except for the space dust it ionized along its path, lanced across the void toward the lunar surface. Impact in 32 seconds. Krexithel counted down silently, imagining the terror that would soon grip the human colonies as they watched their fellow creatures die. The psychological effect was always the most important part. Fear was the supremacy's greatest weapon. 30 seconds. 20. 10. The beam struck the lunar surface with the force of a small star, carved into the regolith with surgical precision. And then nothing. Where the mining facility should have been obliterated, where molten rock should have fontained into space, where the very ground should have been transformed into a crater of glass and plasma, there was only nothing. No explosion, no debris, no response at all. Weapon malfunction, Krexithel demanded. Negative, sir. Full power discharge confirmed. Beam coherence optimal. Direct hit on target. The Admiral's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation among his species. Then where's the damage? Vexmer studied his sensors with growing bewilderment. Sir, I'm reading. This is impossible. The beam appears to have been absorbed. There's no thermal signature, no structural damage, no indication that our weapon even. Alarms began wailing. Across the bridge, red emergency lighting bathed the command center as proximity sensors screamed warnings into the chaos. Report. Krexithel roared. Unknown contacts emerging from the lunar surface. The sensor operator's voice cracked with panic. Hundreds of them. They're accelerating toward our position at impossible speeds. On the main display, the tactical plot erupted with crimson dots streaming away from Earth's moon like angry hornets from a disturbed nest. Whatever those objects were, They moved faster than anything the Vorthok had ever encountered except their own ships. Krexithel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. In 43 conquered systems, across hundreds of worlds, he had never seen offensive technology that could simply absorb a particle lance strike. Admiral, Zeltek's voice was barely above a whisper. We're receiving a transmission from the lunar surface, audio only, put it through. The bridge fell silent except for the steady pulse of warning indicators. Then, cutting through the electronic chaos like a blade through silk, came a human voice, male, calm, speaking in perfect Vorthok fleet. This is Lunar Defense. Command, you have 30 seconds to retreat beyond the heliopause, or we will consider your presence an act of war. This is your only warning. Krexithel's laughter echoed through the bridge, a harsh sound like grinding metal. They threaten us. With what? The human voice continued, unperturbed by the lack of response. 25 seconds, sir. Vexmer's voice carried an edge of urgency. Those incoming contacts our targeting systems can't lock onto them. They're employing some kind of stealth technology we've never encountered. 15 seconds. Krexithel's amusement faded. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to make sense of sensor readings that defied explanation. The approaching objects had somehow become invisible to their most sophisticated detection equipment. 10 seconds. Time slowed. In that eternal moment, Admiral Krexithel of the Vorthok Supremacy realized that perhaps, for the first time in his career, he had underestimated his prey. 5. The human voice fell silent. And in the vast emptiness between Earth and her moon, something moved in the darkness that had been waiting 40 years for exactly this moment. The first human ship materialized 3 kilometers off the Sovereign's Wrath's starboard flank like a ghost suddenly becoming flesh. It was impossibly sleek, its hull a perfect mirror that reflected the stars and made it nearly invisible against the cosmic backdrop. No larger than a Vorthok destroyer, yet something about its predatory lines made Admiral Krexithel's combat instincts scream warnings. He'd learned to trust over decades of warfare. Stealth field collapse detected. Vexmer shouted over the blaring alarms. Contact is powering. Weapons. The human vessel opened fire, without fanfare, without warning, without the ceremonial posturing that marks civilized warfare. A lance of brilliant blue energy, not the crude particle beams the Vorthok knew, but something far more elegant and infinitely more deadly carved through space and struck the Sovereign's wrath shields. The dreadnought's defensive barriers, capable of withstanding a supernova's fury, lasted exactly 0.3 seconds. The beam punched through the forward armor like tissue paper, vaporized 3 decks of crew quarters, and exited through the starboard hull in a fountain of molten metal and screaming atmosphere. 1,700 Vorthok warriors died before they could even understand they were under attack. Impossible. Krexithel roared, his forearms gripping his command throne as the ship bucked under the assault. No weapon can penetrate Vorthok shields. Sir, the energy signature is not conventional plasma or particle acceleration. His weapons officer reported, mandibles chattering with fear. This is some kind of exotic matter beam. It's rewriting the atomic structure of our hull at the quantum level. More human ships decloaked around the Vorthok fleet like deadly flowers blooming in the void. Dozens of them, each one a masterpiece of predatory engineering. They moved with impossible grace, their hulls shifting and flowing like liquid metal as they adjusted their configurations. For optimal combat efficiency. The Retribution's Edge, a heavy cruiser position on the fleet's outer perimeter, tried to target the nearest human vessel. Its massive gun turret swiveled to track the enemy ship, but the human craft simply wasn't there anymore. It had folded space around itself, stepping sideways through dimensions the Vorthok couldn't even perceive, and emerged directly behind the cruiser. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The human ship extended what looked like metallic tentacles from its hull, not weapons. But something far worse. They pierced the cruiser's armor with surgical precision, and Krexithel watched in horror as his proud warship began to dissolve from the inside out. The hull plates peeled away like skin from rotting fruit, revealing the ship's internal structure before that to crumble to dust. They're using nanomachines, someone screamed across the comm. Self-replicating construction units. They're taking our ships apart at the molecular level. The Retribution's Edge imploded with the silence of vacuum, crushed by its own collapsing superstructure as the human nanites consumed everything that held it together. 2,000 more Vorthok died in that single, impossible moment. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Krexithel commanded, but even as the words left his translator, he knew it was futile. How did you evade an enemy that could step through folded space? How did you fight weapons that unmade matter itself? The human ships began to dance. There was no other word for it. They moved through three-dimensional space like performers on a stage, each maneuver precisely choreographed to complement the others. When Vorthic guns fired, the humans were already elsewhere. When Vorthic ships tried to ram them in desperation, the humans flowed around them like water around stones. The destroyer Carnage Born managed to lock onto one of the human vessels. It fired everything. It had particle lances, plasma torpedoes, kinetic penetrators, even its emergency nuclear warheads. The human ship didn't dodge. It didn't need to. Every projectile, every beam of energy simply stopped, held motionless in space by invisible forces while the human vessel examined them. With what Krexithel can only interpret as scientific curiosity, then the human ship spoke, not through communications equipment, but directly into the minds of every Vorthic on the Carnage Born. The voice was calm, clinical, utterly without emotion. Fascinating. Your weapons technology is approximately 4 centuries behind our current standard. Your metallurgy suggests a civilization that has not yet learned to manipulate matter. At the subatomic level, your tactical doctrine relies on overwhelming numerical superiority rather than technological innovation. You are classified as primitive. The Carnage Born exploded not from external weapons, but from within. Every atom in its superstructure simultaneously achieved nuclear fusion. The ship became a miniature star for exactly 1 second before the reaction was somehow contained and snuffed out, leaving nothing but an expanding cloud of ionized gas. Sir, Vexmer's voice cracked with panic. We've lost 7 ships in 4 minutes. Our weapons are completely ineffective. Request permission to withdraw. Krexithel stared at the tactical display where red icons representing his fleet were winking out one by one. The humans had perhaps 50 ships to his remaining 100, yet they were being systematically slaughtered like cattle in an abattoir. Admiral, the communications officer's voice carried pure terror. I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the lunar surface. Something's launching. On the main screen, Earth's moon had transformed. What had appeared to be mining installations and research facilities were revealing their true nature as weapon emplacements. Beyond the Vorthic's comprehension, structures that had seemed like communications arrays were unfolding into geometric configurations that hurt to look at directly. Industrial complexes were reshaping themselves into launch platforms for weapons that defied physics. The first missile broke Luna's gravity well with casual ease, accelerating at rates that should have liquefied any guidance system ever built. It was followed by a second, then dozens, then hundreds, thermonuclear signatures. The sensor operator screamed, but the yield readings, they don't make sense. Each warhead is showing energy output equivalent to our ship's main reactor. Krexithel felt his certainty crumble like sand. The humans hadn't just absorbed his particle lance strike. They had been prepared for it. They had been waiting for this moment, perhaps for decades. The lunar colony wasn't a mining operation at all. It was a fortress. All ships, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of absolute desperation. Emergency jump. Retreat to the outer system. Execute immediately. But even as his fleet began the complex process of charging their faster-than-light drives, Krexithel knew it was too late. The human missiles were already among them, their exotic propulsion systems allowing them to maneuver like living things. They struck with the fury of captive stars, each detonation creating fusion fires that burned at temperatures found only in the hearts of suns. The dreadnought Empire's fury took a direct hit and simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a kilometer of armored death dealing destruction across a dozen star systems. The next, it was expanding plasma and regret. As his own ship's jump drive finally achieved full charge, Krexithel caught one last glimpse of the human fleet through his viewports. They had stopped firing now, content to watch the Vorthic retreat. But in that moment of silence, he saw something that would haunt him through every nightmare that followed. The human ships were communicating with each other using light patterns across their hulls. Not words, but something that looked almost like laughter. The Sovereign's wrath jumped to hyperspace with the screams of dying Vorthic echoing through its corridors, leaving behind 23 ships and over 40,000 warriors who would never see the Supremacy's core worlds again. Admiral Krexithel had finally learned humanity's name. and humanity had learned his die. High Admiral Dexnova of the Vorthic War Council received the news of HFY's defeat in the silence of her private chambers. 3 weeks after the disaster at Earth's moon, the Admiral knelt on the meditation platform, her forearms folded in the traditional position of contemplation, while the holographic transmission played out its tale of impossible human weapons, its ships that fought like living things. When HFY's bloodied image finished its report, Dexnova remained motionless for several minutes. Finally, she spoke to the empty air. Activate Priority 1 combat protocols. Mobilize the 3rd, 7th, and 12th Battle Fleets. Full war configuration. Her aide, a younger officer named Kixdell, materialized from the chamber's shadows where he had been waiting. High Admiral, surely a single battle fleet would suffice for 1,200 ships. Dexnova's voice cut through his objection like a blade. Kixdell, do you know how many worlds have resisted the supremacy in the past century? 17. High Admiral, do you know how many required more than a single battle fleet to conquer? Long pause. None. High Admiral, precisely. She rose from her meditation position, her movements carrying the fluid grace of a predator. These humans have demonstrated technology we do not understand, wielding weapons we cannot explain. They destroyed 23 of our finest ships without suffering a single casualty. This cannot be coincidence. She activated the chamber's main holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of the local galactic sector. Earth appeared as a small blue icon near the rim, seemingly insignificant among the hundreds of worlds marked with Vorthic conquest. Flags for 43 systems. We have been the apex predator. Dexnova continued. We arrive. We demonstrate our power. Civilizations kneel or die. But what happens when the predator encounters something higher on the food chain? Kixdell's mandibles clicked nervously. High Admiral, surely you don't believe these humans could threaten the supremacy itself? I believe, young aide, that we have stumbled upon something we were never meant to find. She manipulated the display, zooming in on Earth's solar system. Look at their development pattern. A single world, barely colonized beyond their moon, no faster-than-light travel, no galactic presence whatsoever. Yet they possess weapons technology that made our dreadnoughts look like children's toys. Perhaps they're refugees from another galaxy, survivors of some ancient war. No, Dexnova's certainty was absolute. Their language, their broadcasts, their entire cultural signature, they evolved in that system. Which means the terrible implication hung between them like a blade waiting to fall, which means they developed this technology themselves. Kixdell whispered, in isolation, without conquest, without absorbing the knowledge of defeated civilizations. They built weapons capable of rewriting matter at the quantum level, using nothing but their own ingenuity. Dexnova deactivated the display and turned toward the chamber's exit. Prepare my ship. We leave for the rallying point within the hour. Hi, Admiral. What if Admiral HFY was mistaken? What if the humans simply have better defensive technology than we anticipated? Dexnova paused at the threshold. Then, Kixdell, 1,200 ships should be more than sufficient to test that theory. The human known as Director Ravencrest stood in the observation deck of Lunar Command Station 7, watching Earth turn slowly against the star field round her. Technicians and military personnel worked at stations that hummed with the quiet efficiency of technology so advanced it bordered on the miraculous. Ma'am, her aide, Commander Ashworth, approached with a data tablet glowing with tactical information. Deep space monitoring stations report massive hyperspace signatures forming at the edge of the system. Energy readings suggest approximately 1,200 vessels. Ravencrest didn't turn from the viewport. She was a woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a practical braid, her dark eyes holding the weight of decisions that could determine humanity's survival. 1,200. They're taking us seriously now. Orders, ma'am. Alert all Luna installations to Condition Alpha. Begin phase 2 preparations immediately. Now she did turn, and Ashworth saw something in her expression that made him unconsciously straighten to attention and send a priority message to the Antarctic facility. Tell Director Blackthorne it's time. Mom, are you certain the Antarctic project? The risks involved. Commander, 3 weeks ago, a single Vorthic fleet arrived in our system expecting to find primitive humans cowering behind bronze shields. Instead, they encountered 40 years of preparation. 2 generations of the most brilliant minds humanity has ever produced and technology that we ourselves barely understand. She moved to the central command console, her fingers dancing across haptic interfaces that responded to her touch. Like living things, now they're returning with everything they have. The main display activated, showing a tactical overview of the solar system. Icons representing human installations dotted not just Luna, but asteroid mining stations, orbital platforms around Jupiter and Saturn, and structures hidden in the outer system's Kuiper belt that officially didn't exist. The first contact protocols always assumed they would come with overwhelming force. Ravencrest continued. We planned for it, prepared for it, built for it. But I confess, even our most pessimistic projections didn't anticipate 1,200 ships. While our defenses hold, Ravencrest was quiet for a long moment, studying the display with the intensity of a general planning humanity's last battle. Commander, do you know what the Vorthic supremacy's greatest weakness is? Their arrogance? Their predictability? She smiled, and Ashworth found himself thinking of ancient predators contemplating prey. They're coming here expecting to face the same humans who built stealth fighters and fusion weapons. They have no idea what we become across the lunar surface. Massive installations that had masqueraded as industrial complexes for 4 decades began their true transformation. Particle accelerators longer than terrestrial cities powered up with the wine it barely contained. Energy. Quantum manufacturing plants that could reshape matter at the subatomic level shifted into military production mode. Weapons platforms that existed in folded space began unfolding into normal reality, like flowers blooming in fast motion and deep beneath Antarctica's ice. In a facility that consumed more power than entire continents, something that humanity had spent 30 years building began to wake up. Ma'am, the communications officer called across the command center. Signal from Earth. President Martinez is requesting a status briefing. Tell the president that Operation Silent Thunder is proceeding as planned, Ravencrest replied, and remind her that from this point forward, all communications with Earth are to be considered compromised. We're on our own now. As if summoned by her words, proximity alarms began sounding throughout the station. On the main display, the edge of the solar system erupted with 1,200 flashes of twisted light. As the Vorthic war fleets dropped out of hyperspace, the final test of humanity's evolution was about to begin. All stations, Ravencrest's voice carried across every human installation in the solar system with calm authority. This is Lunar Command. Execute Phase 2. Show them what we've learned in 40 years of silence. And in the cold vacuum between worlds, ancient mysteries prepared to meet alien arrogance with the fury of a species that had spent for decades preparing for this exact moment. The Vorthic thought they were coming to conquer primitive humans. They were about to discover what happened when you disturbed a species that had weaponized physics itself. High Admiral Lexinova materialized on the bridge of her flagship Imperium's Edge as the massive war. That armada completed its emergence from hyperspace. 1,200 ships spread across the outer solar system in a formation that had conquered dozens of worlds, a wall of armored death, extending across millions of cubic kilometers of space. Long-range sensors confirm Admiral Crexthel's initial reports, her sensor operator announced. Minimal defensive installations around the primary world. The lunar colony appears unchanged since the first engagement. Lexinova examined the tactical display with the careful attention of a hunter, studying dangerous prey. Something about the sensor readings troubled her. Though she couldn't articulate what, the human installations looked exactly as they had. 3 weeks ago, industrial complexes, mining operations, research facilities. Nothing that should concern a war fleet capable of sterilizing entire star systems. Yet Admiral Crexthel's retreating ships had been broadcasting emergency signals. Until the moment they jumped to hyperspace. 23 vessels lost, not to overwhelming numbers or superior firepower, but to technology that defied explanation. Deploy the fleet in attack formation Omega, she commanded. I want overlapping fields of fire covering every approach vector. If the humans possess stealth capabilities, they won't be able to hide from 1,200 ships. The armada began its deadly dance, vast dreadnoughts and nimble destroyers repositioning themselves with the precision of a ceremony. Each ship carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Together, they represented the accumulated military might of an empire that had never known defeat. High Admiral. Communications Officer Velthara interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from the lunar surface. Same source as the previous engagement. Put it through. The bridge fell silent as a human voice filled the command center. Female this time, older, speaking in flawless Vorthik with an accent that suggested extensive study of their language. Vorthik War Fleet, this is Director Ravencrest of Lunar Defense Command. You have entered our system with hostile intent after your forces attacked our installations. Without provocation, you have 30 seconds to withdraw beyond the heliopause or face the consequences. Dexnova S. Mandibles clicked. With amusement. They think to threaten 1,200 ships with the same voice that spoke to 50? Open a response channel. Channel open, High Admiral, Human Director Ravencrest. Dexnova S voice carried the authority of 43 conquered worlds. I am High Admiral Dexnova of the Vorthik War Council. Your species has demonstrated technology that interests the supremacy. Surrender your weapons research and submit to Vorthik rule, that your people will be granted the honor of serving the greatest empire in the galaxy. The response came immediately. High Admiral Dexnova, your terms are rejected. You have 15 seconds to begin your withdrawal. 10 seconds. Dexnova gestured to her weapons officer. All ships, target the lunar installations. Begin bombardment. 5 seconds. Fire. The outer system erupted in violence as 1,200 Vorthik ships opened fire simultaneously. Particle lances that could boil oceans carved through space. Toward Luna. Plasma torpedoes capable of cracking continental shelves streaked toward human installations. Kinetic projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed followed ballistic trajectories toward their targets. For a moment, the void between worlds became a hurricane of destructive energy as the concentrated firepower of an entire empire focused on Earth's small, gray satellite. Then something impossible happened. Every weapon stopped, not destroyed, not deflected, simply held motionless in space as if time itself had frozen around them. Particle beams became motionless lances of light stretching across millions of kilometers. Plasma torpedoes hung like angry stars suspended in crystal. Kinetic projectiles stopped mid-flight as though they had struck an invisible wall. Weapon. Status report. Dexnova roared. All systems functioning normally, High Admiral. Energy discharge confirmed on all ships, but our attacks aren't reaching their targets. On the main display, the tactical plot showed 1,200 streams of weapons fire simply ending, as if reality itself had decided that Vorthik weapons were no longer permitted to function. Impossible, she whispered. Then Director Ravencrest's voice returned, no longer diplomatic, no longer offering terms. High Admiral, you have just witnessed humanity's mastery over the fundamental forces of physics. Your weapons exist in our reality only because we permit them to exist. Observe. The suspended weapons fire began to move again, but not toward their original targets. Every particle beam, every torpedo, every kinetic projectile turned in space and began accelerating back toward the Vorthik fleet. The Empire's own attacks, magnified and enhanced beyond their original specifications, came home with interest. The dreadnought Sovereign's hammer took 17 of its own particle lance strikes. Simultaneously, its shields, designed to absorb such energy, overloaded instantly when faced with their own reflected power amplified beyond theoretical limits. The ship's armor vaporized, its internal structure collapsed, and 3,000 Vorthik warriors died in the space between heartbeats. Glory's triumph. A heavy cruiser on the formation's flank tried to evade its returning plasma torpedoes, but found itself caught in a web of its own weapons. Fire. The torpedoes had been improved somehow, their guidance systems enhanced to near-perfect accuracy. Their explosive yields increased by orders of magnitude. The cruiser vanished in a sphere of fusion fire that briefly outshone nearby stars. All ships evasive action, Dexnova commanded, watching in horror as her fleet's own weapons tore through their ranks like vengeful spirits. Emergency jump preparation, we're retreating. High Admiral. Her sensor operator's voice cracked with panic. New contacts emerging from the lunar surface. Hundreds of them. The tactical display erupted with new icons as human ships decloaked around Luna the 50. Vessels from the previous engagement, but over 1,000. They materialized from what appeared to be folded space. Each one a masterpiece of engineering that made Vorthik technology look like crude metalwork. But these weren't the sleek predators that had decimated Krexthal's fleet. These were something else, entirely massive constructs that defied geometric classification. Their hulls seeming to exist in more dimensions than conventional space allowed. They moved without propulsion, maneuvered without thrusters, and radiated energy signatures that made Dexnova's sensors scream warnings about impossible physics. "Hi, Admiral." Velthara's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm detecting massive quantum field fluctuations throughout the system. The humans, they're doing something to space-time itself. Indeed, the very fabric of reality around the human fleet began to twist and warp. Stars visible through the viewport stretched into elongated streaks. The familiar patterns of constellations folded in on themselves like origami made of light. Space itself was being reshaped according to human will. Then the human ships opened fire. What emerged from their weapons wasn't energy or matter, but something that existed in the spaces between attacks that struck targets. By rewriting the fundamental laws that governed their existence, Vorthix ships didn't explode or dissolve. They simply stopped being ships and became something else. The destroyer Vengeance Born transformed into a cloud of exotic particles. The cruiser Death's Herald became a geometric pattern of pure mathematics. That hurt to perceive directly. Jump drives. Dexnova screamed over the chaos. All ships initiate emergency hyperspace transition. But as her fleet began the complex process of folding space around their hulls, they discovered that hyperspace itself was no longer accessible. The humans had somehow sealed the dimensions, trapping the Vorthix Armada in normal space like insects in amber dot in less than 10 minutes. High Admiral Dexnova's invasion force had been reduced from 1,200 ships to fewer than 800, and the human fleet was just beginning to warm up. Director Ravencrest. Dexnova opened a communication channel with hands that trembled despite her best efforts to maintain composure. We request parley." The response came not through her communication system, but directly into her mind. "Hi, Admiral. Parley is for equals. You came here with the intent to conquer and enslave. We will now demonstrate why that was a mistake." The human fleet began to accelerate toward the surviving Vorthix ships. And Dexnova realized with growing horror that the real battle was just beginning. The space between Earth's moon and the scattered remnants of the Vorthix Armada became a killing field where physics itself served as humanity's weapon. High Admiral Dexnova watched from the bridge of the Imperium's edge. As human ships moved through dimensions her species couldn't even perceive, striking from angles that didn't exist in conventional space. Her remaining 732 vessels had formed a desperate defensive sphere, overlapping shields and interlocking fields of fire, creating the strongest formation Vorthix military doctrine could devise. It lasted exactly 47 seconds. The human vessel probabilities and simply stepped sideways through folded space and emerged inside the formation's heart. What followed wasn't battle, it was surgery performed with stellar-grade precision, tendrils of coherent energy, each one guided by artificial intelligences that processed tactical data faster than biological minds could comprehend. Reached out to touch 17 Vorthix ships simultaneously. The heavy cruiser Iron Dominance was the first to die. The human energy tendril made contact with its forward armor and began unmaking the molecular bonds that held the hull together. In seconds, the kilometers of hardened combat steel became an expanding cloud of component atoms, revealing the ship's interior like a dissected insect. The crew had just enough time to realize what was happening before the effect reached them. Captain Murthic, commanding the destroyer Blade's Edge, watched his neighboring ships dissolve and made a decision that would have been called suicidal under any other circumstances. He activated his ship's self-destruct sequence and rammed directly toward the human vessel, hoping to damage it with his ship's dying nuclear fire. The human ship probabilities N caught the exploding Vorthix destroyer in a containment field and compressed the nuclear detonation into a sphere of captive plasma the size of a marble. Then it hurled that concentrated fury back at the Vorthix formation. Like a bullet fired from the barrel of a god, the miniaturized explosion struck the Dreadnought Supremacy's fist and expanded back to full size upon impact. The massive warship, veteran of 17 planetary conquests, vanished in a ball of fusion fire that briefly created its own gravity well. All ships focused fire on that target, Dexnova commanded, desperate to destroy at least one human vessel before her fleet was completely annihilated. Everything we have. 300 Vorthix ships turned their weapons on probability's end, unleashing enough concentrated firepower to sterilize a continent. The human ship simply wasn't there. When the attacks arrived, it had folded space around itself, existing in a pocket dimension that allowed it to observe the battle, while remaining completely untouchable, while the Vorthix fleet fired at empty space. The rest of the human armada struck from every direction. At once, the Entropy's daughter materialized above the Vortic formation and released a weapon that shouldn't have been possible, a controlled black hole the size of a marble. The artificial singularity fell through the fleet formation like a stone through water, its gravitational effects tearing ships apart at the atomic level. The cruiser war's harvest was stretched into a ribbon of metal and flesh 3 kilometers long. Before the exotic matter of its hull finally gave way to tidal forces, Commander Zixtel, aboard the frigate Swift Retribution, watched his ship's sensors go mad as space-time itself began to buckle around the human fleet. Reality was becoming optional, geometry was suggestions, and the fundamental laws of physics were apparently subject to revision at humanity's whim. "Sir," his weapons officer screamed over the chaos, "our targeting computers can't log onto the human ships. They exist in multiple probability states simultaneously, then fire manually." Zixtel roared back, "Spray and pray if you have to." But even as his ship's guns blazed defiance into the void, Zixtel knew it was futile. The human vessels moved like liquid mercury through dimensions that Vortic science had never imagined. When weapons fire did manage to reach them, it simply passed through their hulls as if the ships were made of organized light. The quantum paradox. A human battleship that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously opened fire on the Vortic fleet's command section. Its weapons didn't destroy matter, they convinced it to destroy itself. The dreadnought Emperor's will began consuming its own hull. As its atomic structure received new instructions from reality itself, the ship ate itself from the inside out, metal flowing like water as it was converted into exotic matter that defied classification. Admiral Vexkara, commanding the surviving remnants of the fleet's left flank, attempted a desperate flanking maneuver with her remaining 23 ships. They accelerated to maximum burn, hoping to get behind the human formation and strike at what might be vulnerable rear sections. The human ship Causality's revenge intercepted them. By arriving at their destination before they had left their starting position, time meant nothing. To these vessels, they could strike in the past, defend in the future, and exist in the present only when it was tactically convenient. Vexkara's flagship, the cruiser Merciless Dawn, found itself caught in a temporal loop for exactly 13 seconds. The ship experienced its own destruction over and over again: hull breach, explosive decompression, crew death, structural collapse before the human ship released it from the cycle and allowed it to die properly. High Admiral Dexanova's tactical officer was weeping now, his four eyes streaming with fluid as he watched the systematic annihilation of everything he had believed invincible. "We've lost over 400 ships. The humans aren't just defeating us, they're rewriting the laws of war itself." Dexanova stared at the tactical display where red icons representing her fleet's casualties outnumbered the survivors 3-1. In 30 minutes of combat, humanity had demonstrated mastery over forces that the Vortic supremacy had never dreamed existed. They weren't just more advanced. They had evolved beyond the need for conventional physics. "Ma'am," her communications officer's voice was barely audible over the sounds of dying ships. "I'm receiving surrender requests from 17 ship commanders. They're asking permission to abandon ship." For a moment, Dexanova considered it. Her pride, her empire, her entire understanding of the universe, all of it lay in ruins around her like the wreckage of her fleet. But then she remembered the 43 systems that knelt before Vortic might, the billions of beings who had learned to fear their name. "Denied," she said quietly. "We are Vortic. We do not surrender." She opened a fleet-wide channel, broadcasting to every surviving ship, "Warriors of the supremacy, we came here to conquer. We will die here with honor. All ships, prepare for final assault. If we must fall, let us fall like the storm." The remaining 312 Vortic vessels formed a spearhead formation and charged directly at the human fleet. Their weapons blazed with the fury of desperation, their crews fighting with the courage of beings who knew they were already dead. The human ship's inevitable conclusion met their charge alone. It was smaller than most Vortic destroyers. Its hull, a simple geometric solid that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As the entire surviving Vortic fleet focused their combined firepower on this single target, the ship began to unfold. Reality around inevitable conclusion twisted as the vessel revealed its true nature. It wasn't a ship at all, it was a construct that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. And what the Vortic had been seeing was merely its 3-dimensional shadow. As it unfolded into full existence, space-time itself began to reshape around it. The concentrated fire of 300 ships struck the human vessel and was absorbed, not by armor or shields, but by the ship's manipulation of fundamental constants. The laws of thermodynamics became suggestions. Conservation of energy became a polite recommendation. The electromagnetic spectrum became a canvas for the ship to paint with. Then, inevitable conclusion fired once. The weapon it discharged wasn't energy or matter, but pure information, a signal that rewrote the quantum signatures of everything it touched. It spread through the Vortic formation like a virus made of mathematics, and wherever it passed, ships simply forgot how to exist. The destroyer Righteous Fury received the signal, and its atoms politely excused themselves from the bonds that held them together. The cruiser Dark Victory accepted new instructions about its relationship with gravity, and promptly fell upward into a dimension that didn't have a name. The dreadnought Conquest's Glory was informed that its nuclear reactors had always been decorative features and shouldn't have been containing fusion reactions in the first place. In 17 seconds, High Admiral Dexnova watched 189 ships cease to exist. Through an act of aggressive enlightenment, her flagship and 22 other vessels remained, floating in space like debris from a civilization that had just learned it was obsolete. High Admiral, Director Ravencrest's voice filled the bridge once more, but now it carried something that might have been pity. Your fleet is broken. Your Empire's military doctrine has been proven inadequate, but you and your surviving crew still live. We offer you one final choice. Dexnova closed her four eyes and tried to find words for a situation that had no precedent in Vortic history around her. The bridge crew waited in silence, broken only by the distant sounds of hull breaches and dying life support systems. What choice? She finally whispered. Return to your Empire. Tell them what you have seen here. Inform them that humanity is not available for conquest, enslavement, or interference of any kind. Make them understand that if they ever venture into our space again, we will not be so merciful. Merciful? Dexnova's voice carried bitter laughter. You call this mercy, High Admiral? Ravencrest's reply came with the weight of absolute certainty. If we had wished to demonstrate our full capabilities, your Empire would have ceased to exist the moment your first scout entered our territory. What you have witnessed today was a lesson in restraint. The surviving Vortic ships found their hyperspace drives suddenly functional again. The dimensional barriers that had trapped them dissolving like morning mist. But as they prepared to flee, each vessel received a final gift from humanity: complete technical specifications for the weapons that had just destroyed their fleet, along with theoretical frameworks for the physics that made such weapons possible. The message was clear. We want you to understand exactly how outmatched you are. As the remnants of the Vortic war fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying news of humanity's ascension to the distant halls of their empire, Director Ravencrest stood in her command center and allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Phase 2 had been a complete success. Now it was time for Phase 3. The Vortic supremacy had ruled 43 star systems for over 2 centuries, but it took exactly 18 hours for news of Dexnova's defeat to reach the core worlds. High Admiral Dexnova's battered flagship limped into Vortic Prime's orbital shipyards, carrying the impossible story of humanity's technological supremacy, followed by the scattered survivors of the greatest military disaster in their empire's history. Emperor K.R.X. the Undying, whose reign had spanned for 100 years and whose armies had never known defeat, received the report in the absolute silence of his throne chamber. The massive alien sat motionless on the seat of dominion, his ancient carapace scarred by countless battles. His four eyes focused on a holographic display showing the tactical recordings from Earth's solar system. Repeat the casualty figures. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority accumulated across for centuries of conquest. 1,168 ships destroyed, my Emperor. High Admiral Dexnova knelt before the throne, her own armor bearing fresh scars from her ship's desperate flight. 800,000 warriors dead. 23 vessels returned to report this impossibility. The Emperor's mandibles clicked slowly, a sound that had preceded the execution of entire planetary populations. Around the throne chamber, the War Council maintained perfect stillness. These were beings who had personally overseen the subjugation of star systems. Yet none dared break the silence that followed Dexnova's words. Show me the weapon specifications they transmitted to our surviving ships, K.R.X. commanded. The holographic display shifted, revealing technical schematics that defied everything the Vortic understood about physics. weapons that manipulated quantum probability, ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, technology that treated the fundamental laws of reality as suggestions. My Emperor, war leader Vexthar spoke carefully. Our greatest scientists have been analyzing these specifications. They report that humanity has achieved mastery over forces we cannot comprehend. This technology appears to be based on principles that our physics declares impossible. Impossible, the Emperor repeated, his voice carrying dangerous quiet. Yet 1,200 ships are destroyed, 800,000 warriors are dead. The humans mock us by providing exact details of how they achieved this impossibility. He rose from the throne, a movement that sent subtle vibrations through the chamber floor. At full height, Emperor Krixthal stood nearly 4 meters tall, his presence filling the space with the accumulated menace of 2 centuries of absolute rule. Assemble the Grand Fleet, he commanded, every dreadnought, every battle station, every ship of war in the supremacy. I want 50,000 vessels ready for jump within 1 standard cycle. The War Council stirred uneasily. The Grand Fleet had never been assembled in its entirety. The sheer logistical complexity of coordinating 50,000 ships exceeded anything the supremacy had ever attempted. My Emperor, High Admiral Vexnova raised her head, perhaps a diplomatic approach. Silence. The word cut through her suggestion like a blade. The humans have demonstrated technology beyond our understanding. They have killed our warriors and humiliated our fleets. But they made one critical error, Admiral. K.R. Exthal manipulated the holographic display, showing the tactical recordings from a different angle. They revealed their location. They showed us their capabilities. They gave us their weapon specifications. In their arrogance, they have provided us with everything we need to understand our enemy, sir. War leader Kixnova ventured. The humans' weapons appear to violate. Physics is not absolute. The Emperor's voice carried the certainty of ancient knowledge. It can be learned. It can be adapted. It can be countered. He gestured to the technical specifications floating in the holographic space. Our scientists will study these designs. Our engineers will build countermeasures. Our warriors will learn to fight enemies that bend reality to their will. The Emperor activated a secure communication channel, broadcasting to every military installation in the supremacy. This is Emperor K.R. Exthal. Initiate War Protocol Absolute. All construction facilities are to be converted to military production. All available personnel are to be drafted into service. All research assets are to focus on understanding and countering human technology. As orders flashed across the Empire, at faster-than-light speeds, mobilizing the greatest war machine in galactic history, the Emperor turned his attention back to the surviving members of the Xenova-S fleet. Admiral, your ships carry something more valuable than weapons or warriors. They carry knowledge of how the humans fight, how they think, how they reveal their capabilities. This intelligence will be crucial to our victory, my Emperor. The Xenova-S voice carried a note of doubt that would have meant death under normal circumstances. The humans' mastery of physics appears complete. Their weapons rewrite matter at the quantum level. Their ships exist in dimensions we cannot perceive. How can conventional military force overcome such advantages? Emperor Krixthal's laugh was a sound like grinding stone. Admiral, the supremacy has conquered 43 star systems not through superior technology, but through superior will. We have faced enemies with better weapons, faster ships, stronger defenses. Yet they all kneel before us now because we understood one fundamental truth. Every advantage can be neutralized by sufficient force applied with absolute determination. He manipulated the display again, showing star charts of the local galactic sector. The humans have 1 solar system. We have 43. They have perhaps a few million population. We command billions. They revealed advanced weapons to intimidate us. We will show them what happens when an entire empire decides that a single species must die. As if summoned by his words, alerts began cascading through the throne chamber's communication systems. Across the supremacy, massive industrial complexes were retooling for war production. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels were switching to military construction. The greatest minds in the empire were being redirected toward a single goal, understanding and defeating human technology. My Emperor, the chief science advisor's holographic image appeared. Preliminary analysis of the human weapon specifications suggests they are using some form of exotic matter manipulation. Our theoretical physicists believe it may be possible to develop countermeasures, but the research will require unlimited resources, Crichton finished. Approved. How long? 6 months to develop theoretical frameworks, perhaps 2 years to create practical applications. You have 6 weeks. The science advisor's image flickered with what might have been panic. My emperor. Such acceleration is theoretically impossible, advisor. The humans have just demonstrated that theoretical impossibility is merely a failure of imagination. If they can rewrite the laws of physics, we can certainly rewrite our development timelines. As the communication ended, Emperor Crichton returned to his throne, but he did not sit. Instead, he stood before the seat of dominion like a general, surveying a battlefield that stretched across the galaxy. Admiral HFY, you will oversee the integration of human tactical data into our battle planning. War Leader Vexthara, you will coordinate the Grand Fleet's assembly. War Leader Kixanova, you will liaise with our science divisions to ensure practical application of new technologies. Each officer acknowledged their orders with the crisp efficiency of beings who understood that failure meant death not just for themselves, but potentially for their entire civilization. My emperor, Kixanova asked as the War Council prepared to disperse. What shall we call this campaign? Crichton finally settled onto his throne, his ancient eyes reflecting the light of distant stars where human ships waited with weapons that could unmake reality itself. Operation Final Lesson, he said quietly. The humans believe they have taught us to fear them. We will now teach them why that was a mistake. As the greatest military mobilization in galactic history began, accelerated by the desperate urgency of a species that had just learned it was no longer the apex predator, humanity's deep space monitoring stations detected the massive energy signatures of 50,000 ships beginning their journey toward Earth. Director Ravencrest received the intelligence report in her command center. Beneath Luna's surface, surrounded by the hum of technology that had evolved beyond physics into something approaching art. 50,000 ships, she murmured, studying the sensor data. They're bringing everything they have. Orders, ma'am? Commander Ashworth asked. Ravencrest smiled a cold expression that held the promise of lessons the Vorthic had not yet learned. Send a message to the Antarctic facility. Tell Director Blackthorn that Phase 3 is authorized. And the fleet, Mum? The fleet will hold position and prepare for the greatest battle in human history. She turned back to the display showing the approaching Vorthic armada. But first, we're going to show them what happens when you threaten the homeworld of a species that has weaponized curiosity itself. In the frozen depths of Antarctica, something that had been sleeping for 30 years began to wake up, and reality itself held its breath in anticipation. The Vorthic Grand Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, like a metallic storm given form and purpose. 50,000 ships stretched across a volume of space larger than most star systems, their combined mass sufficient to destabilize planetary orbits through gravitational influence alone. At their center, Emperor Crichton's personal dreadnought, absolute dominion commanded from a bridge that could have housed a small city. Long-range sensors confirmed the human fleet positions unchanged, reported Fleet Admiral Zekvara, the Emperor's most trusted military advisor. Approximately 1,000 vessels maintaining defensive positions around the lunar installations. Emperor Crichton studied the tactical display with the patience of a being who had spent for centuries perfecting the art of conquest. His scientists had worked without sleep for 6 weeks, developing countermeasures based on the weapon specifications humanity had so arrogantly provided. Exotic matter disruptors, quantum field inhibitors, dimensional anchor systems technologies that should neutralize the humans' impossible advantages. Deploy the test formations, he commanded. I want to confirm our countermeasures before committing the full fleet. 1,000 Vorthic ships broke away from the main formation, advancing toward the human positions with their new experimental weapons powered up. These vessels had been modified, with the fruits of desperate innovation, hull plating infused with exotic matter, shield generators that operated across multiple dimensional frequencies, weapons designed to disrupt quantum manipulation fields. Director Ravencrest watched their approach from the command center of Luna Station 7, surrounded by displays showing energy readings that would have been incomprehensible to earlier generations of humanity. Beside her, the holographic presence of Director Blackthorn flickered into existence, his image transmitted from the Antarctic facility deep beneath Earth's ice. The Vorthic appear to have developed countermeasures based on our deliberately leaked specifications, Blackthorn observed, his voice carrying the calm satisfaction of a chess player watching an opponent fall into a carefully prepared trap. Their modifications show remarkable theoretical understanding, but Ravencrest prompted. But they're based on the assumption that the weapons we used in the previous engagement represent our current technological ceiling. Blackthorn's smile held the promise of revelations that would redefine warfare. Shall we disabuse them of that notion? Begin Phase 3, Ravencrest confirmed. Show them what we built while they were analyzing our obsolete technology. In the depths of Antarctica, beneath 3 kilometers of ice and rock, the Prometheus engine stirred to full wakefulness. Humanity's greatest achievement hummed with power that drew directly from the quantum vacuum itself, generating energies that existed in the spaces between dimensions. For 30 years, the greatest minds of the species had poured their knowledge into this single, impossible project. They had built a weapon that could rewrite the fundamental constants of physics across an entire star system. The lead Vorthok test formation flagship Retribution's Dawn opened fire on the nearest human vessels with their new exotic matter disruptors. The weapons performed exactly as designed, targeting the quantum manipulation fields that had made human ships untouchable. During previous engagements, the beams struck the human ship Entropy's gambit and passed through it harmlessly. Impossible. Captain Mervick commanded from the Retribution's Dawn's bridge. Our countermeasures should neutralize their quantum field manipulation. His sensor operator's voice cracked with growing panic. Sir, the human ships aren't using quantum field manipulation anymore. I'm reading energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. They've evolved again. Indeed, the human fleet that met the Vorthok test formation bore little resemblance to the vessels that had decimated Dexanova's armada. These ships weren't bound by the limitations of existing in discrete dimensional states. They had become something more fundamental, expressions of humanity's will given form through technologies that transcended the need for matter or energy. The Entropy's gambit responded to the Vorthok attack by demonstrating humanity's latest innovation, the ability to selectively edit the physical laws that govern their enemies. The Vorthok test formation found themselves in a region of space where momentum conservation no longer applied to their species. Every action they took, firing weapons, adjusting course, even speaking, resulted in equal and opposite reactions that accumulated exponentially. The Retribution's Dawn fired its main guns and was hurled backward by recoil forces that physics had decided to multiply by several million. The ship tumbled end over end, its crew crushed by accelerations that their own weapons had generated. All test ships report total systems failure. Fleet Admiral Zekvara's voice carried the first notes of the panic that would soon consume the Vorthok command structure. The humans have somehow altered the fundamental laws of physics in localized space. Emperor Kirkstall watched 1,000 of his finest ships destroy themselves through the simple act of trying to function in space, where humanity had rewritten the rules of existence. But instead of despair, he felt something that might have been admiration. Magnificent, he whispered. They allowed us to develop countermeasures to their old technology while secretly building new capabilities beyond our comprehension. We have been outmaneuvered by masters. My Emperor, Zekvara's voice held desperate urgency. The humans are advancing on our main fleet. If they can alter physics itself, then we will discover whether 50,000 ships can overcome a handful of vessels that have transcended the need to obey natural law. KRX activated the fleet-wide command channel. All ships, general advance, maximum firepower. If we cannot defeat them through superior technology, we will overwhelm them through sheer numerical superiority. The Vorthok Grand Fleet, representing the accumulated military might of 43 conquered star systems, began its final charge toward Earth's defenders. 50,000 ships accelerated to attack velocity, their combined weapons capable of sterilizing entire worlds. They were met by 12 human vessels. The absolute paradox encountered the fleet's vanguard by stepping sideways through the concept of distance itself. It appeared simultaneously at 1,000 different positions, engaging multiple Vorthok formations across a volume of space measured in astronomical units. Each iteration of the ship operated independently while remaining part of a single consciousness that processed tactical data faster than light could travel. The causality's revenge demonstrated humanity's mastery over temporal mechanics by fighting the battle in reverse chronological order. It struck at Vorthok ships with weapons that arrived before they were fired, using information from futures that might never occur to achieve perfect tactical prescience. Vorthic crews found themselves dying from wounds they wouldn't receive for several minutes, their ships exploding from damage that wouldn't be inflicted until after they were already destroyed. But it was the Prometheus Rising that revealed the true scope of humanity's evolution. The ship didn't fight the Vorthic fleet, it convinced reality that the fleet had never existed in the first place, not destroyed, not defeated, simply edited out of the universe's running total. Emperor Crixthal watched from his flagship as 10,000 ships vanished from existence in the space between one heartbeat and the next. They didn't explode or dissolve, they were retroactively removed from history, leaving gaps in causality that the universe politely declined to acknowledge. My Emperor, his communications officer's voice was barely audible. We're receiving a transmission from the human command. Put it through. Director Ravencrest's image appeared on the main screen, but she was no longer alone. Behind her stood figures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than normal space could contain humans, who had evolved beyond the need for traditional physical forms. Emperor Crixthal. Her voice carried the weight of a species that had spent 40 years preparing for this moment. Your empire has demonstrated impressive adaptability in developing countermeasures to our earlier technology, but you made a fundamental error in your calculations. And what error was that? The Emperor asked, his voice still carrying defiant pride despite watching his fleet dissolve around him. You assumed we were trying to defeat you. Ravencrest's smile held no malice, only the patient satisfaction of a teacher who has successfully conveyed a difficult lesson. Emperor, this entire engagement has been a demonstration designed to communicate a single, crucial fact. Humanity has evolved beyond the reach of conventional warfare. As if to emphasize her point, the remaining 38,000 Vorthic ships found themselves frozen in space, held motionless by forces that existed in the gaps between physics and mathematics. They could observe, they could communicate, but they could not act. You came here with the intention of conquering our species, Ravencrest continued. Instead, you have witnessed our graduation from a planetary civilization to something that operates on principles your empire cannot comprehend. We don't want to rule you, Emperor. We want you to understand your place in the new hierarchy of existence. Emperor Crixthal felt something he had never experienced in for centuries of absolute power, complete, helpless insignificance. Around him, his bridge crew watched in silence as their understanding of reality crumbled like sand. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now, Emperor, you return to your worlds and explain to your people that the age of conquest through force has ended. Humanity claims no territory beyond our solar system, but neither will we tolerate interference in our affairs. Your empire may continue to exist, but it will do so with the understanding that there are now beings in the galaxy who have transcended the need for such crude measures as interstellar war. The human fleet began to withdraw, not through movement, but by simply choosing to exist somewhere else. As they departed, each Vorthic ship received a final transmission, not weapon specifications this time, but something far more valuable: complete theoretical frameworks for the technologies that could elevate their own species beyond the limitations of matter and energy. This is our gift to you. Ravencrest's voice followed them across the void. The knowledge needed to evolve beyond the need for empire, beyond the hunger for conquest, beyond the primitive cycle of domination and submission. Use it wisely. As the Vorthic Grand Fleet powered up their hyperspace drives for the long journey home, Emperor Crixthal sat in silence on his throne, contemplating a universe that had suddenly become much larger and infinitely more complex than he had ever imagined. The age of the Vorthic supremacy was over. The age of something new had begun. And in the cold spaces between stars, humanity quietly returned to the patient work of becoming something that the galaxy had never seen before, a species that had weaponized wisdom itself.